So let's start with those words once again that we heard from 2 Kings. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for God has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As God lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." As God lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. Now, back on the fourth Sunday in Advent, which seems like forever ago, but really was just a few weeks, I quoted C.S. Lewis on the subject of friendship, where he says that few value friendship because few experience it. Few value friendship because few experience it. And at the time, I agreed with him. Or at least, I agreed with what I thought he meant. After all, in the conversations we've had at Pub Theology, when we talked about adult friends, and at numerous other times, both here at church and elsewhere, in the conversations we have had and that adults frequently have, there's been a certain tone of lamentation that we have somehow failed as we get older, as we get around Jesus' age. We've somehow failed to hold on to friendships of the past and to experience the sort of one-on-one connection that we recall from the playground, or maybe from our college years. There's a lament, too, that some of us have, myself included, where we are concerned because we've never really had a single best friend outside of romantic relationships, choosing instead to invest in those relationships with the majority of our energy. And we despair. We feel like we have missed something. We feel like we have missed that serious, deep friendship and what it has to offer. After all, isn't that the goal when it comes to friendship? To be like Elijah and Elisha, or like Ruth and Naomi, from whose story we get those lines that we hear at wedding services, "And treat me not to leave you and to turn back from following you. Wherever you go, there I will go. Wherever you stay, there I will stay." Or Frodo and Sam, or Crockett and Tubbs. That's the sort of friendship that we celebrate, yet we frequently find to be absent in our lives. Now, we frequently blame modern society for this problem, as we do for many problems. We blame our mobile culture, where we move far enough from home to lose track of high school and college friends. We blame a culture that devalues such connections, and some of us do, in fact, feel frequently lonely. But now I am not so sure. I am not so sure that our friend situation is quite as dire as I once thought it was. Or that this model of Elijah and Elisha and the rest actually is the ideal one for friendship. The problem, it seems to me, is that we are confused by what friendship really is and by the role it plays every day in our lives. First, we have a problem with the word itself. In one sense, a friend is someone we like on Facebook. And we use the term that way in conversation as well. We say friend when we're telling a story about an acquaintance. And we do that because the word friend is more rhythmically satisfying than the word acquaintance, and it also maximizes that story's impact. And then on the other hand, we also use the same short word to represent the kind of relationship Elijah and Elisha had. And we aspire to have deep friendships within families. And we rejoice if we can say that we are not only related, but we are friends too. This is quite a range for one small word. On one extreme, we hold these connections too lightly to be of much value, and on the other, we expect a depth that most of the time may be unrealistic. In fact, we usually fail in friendship when we attempt to replicate the intensity of these one-on-one relationships that we find in literature and on cop shows from the 1980s, while ignoring friendship's greatest strength. While we ignore friendship's greatest strength, because friendship, with a few notable exceptions, is not a buddy film, but instead it has an ensemble cast. Now, those of you who listened closely to that reading from 2 Kings will have noticed that as romantic as it would be to see these two prophets traveling together in isolation, they are not. In fact, they are traveling and conversing in a crowd of friends and followers, what the book calls the disciples of the prophets, going with them, experiencing what they experience. As it turns out, the two of them are part of a broader community of friends, as we all are, that supports and nurtures each other on the journey in ways that their gifts allow. You see, the love that is friendship is different from the other three loves as Lewis describes them. Each love has different strengths and weaknesses, but they are all true and holy. And each can, within itself, vary in intensity. And one of the strengths of friendship is that for the most part, it is best not in those one-on-one relationships, but in a group. In a group. In each of my friends, Lewis writes, in each of my friends there is something that only some other friend can bring out. Hence, true friendship is the least jealous of loves. Two friends delight to be joined by a third, and three by a fourth. This, I think, is very different from the image in our heads much of the time. But it is, in fact, the way we actually participate in friendship. We go to parties at a friend's house, and we look forward to seeing the hosts, but we also look forward to seeing who else is there. We expand our circle of friends at a big party, and we reinforce our bonds at a smaller one. And furthermore, we belong to different groups of friends, right? I'm not the only one, I hope. Different groups of friends built around different shared experiences and interests. I have friends that I travel with, and ones that I would never get into a car with, but who I like to study with or go to concerts with. I was telling Tara about a Dungeons & Dragons game I have this afternoon. She is not interested, but we're still friends. C.S. Lewis was famous, of course, for his literary friendships that included people like J.R.R. Tolkien, Owen Barfield, and Dorothy Sayers. But he had other friends too. The key is to feel that connection to the group and celebrate our place in it, giving and receiving in turn. Understanding, in the words of Martin Luther King, that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. We have work friends, and we have church friends. We have neighborhood friends and music friends. And sometimes we see the same people in different groups, but the groups are always a little bit different, and the dynamic is different too. Our role will change. Sometimes we convene. Sometimes we support. Sometimes we just observe, but the spirit of friendship is still there among us. Now, for the most part, I don't think that most of us feel bad about this arrangement, even when we find ourselves within a group not our own. In fact, I took a road trip with one of my travel friends this year and spent about 3 hours with two of his other friends who I had never met before and probably will never meet again. But it was great to be there for 3 hours with them, listening to them talk about how they became friends and why they still are. We don't feel bad about this, but sometimes we forget that inclusivity, that expandability, that hospitality, that welcome. We forget that this is the beauty of friendship. To be perpetually in the midst of many friends. Some we know well, some not so well, most of whom we would like to know better than we do. Instead, we are frustrated. We are frustrated by what feels like shallowness in these relationships. After all, Elisha asks for 2/3 of Elijah's spirit, and that seems to be quite a bit. And we usually don't quite feel like we're getting that from many of our friendships. We feel like we are missing something. Now, this is where a certain amount of humility could really help us understand how much love there truly is in our lives. I don't think we often think of being humble like that, but humility can help us to see how loved we really are. Because in fact, we do get that spirit from our friends, and we give it too. We just do it without thinking. We sometimes just don't see it for what it is. Lewis, in our reading today, tells us that in a perfect friendship, this appreciative love is often so great and so firmly based that each person in the circle feels in their secret heart humbled before all the rest. Lucky, beyond all desert, to be in such company. That is the divine spirit of love. That is the spirit of friendship at work. Friendship is what helps us to connect to that network that King is talking about, which is, after all, the rest of life and humanity. And that network isn't like a single spider web with us plopped down in the middle and with clean, tidy lines radiating out to various nodes in descending order of relation to us. Instead, like all forms of love, like empathy and eros and the divine love that encompasses all of it, like all forms of love, it is a bit of a more of a joyful mess. And when I was a kid, my friends and I used to hang out in an old barn next to the house where one of us lived. Now, they had a few animals, but my friend's parents were actually lawyers, not farmers. So the barn was a lot bigger than they needed. And that barn was full, top to bottom, full of cobwebs. Now, you know what I'm talking about, right? You've all experienced cobwebs. And on a Sunday afternoon, when we were called into dinner after playing in that barn, we would be covered with these cobwebs. Absolutely covered. There were sticky cobwebs in our hair and on our faces and all over our clothes, enough so that we would be picking cobwebs off of each other on Monday at school. And that is what the network of mutuality is like. That is what God's love is like. That is what friendship is like. Stuck to us, never quite leaving us alone. The fact is, each of us is in the midst of a cloud of friends. Those of us here in this room, those we see every day, the ones that we visit when we can, and the ones who are gone. the ones who are gone through circumstance, distance, or death, they all cling to us like cobwebs, but in a good way. Maybe causing a bit of a mess sometimes, but always reminding us that we are loved and that we are not alone. So that we can say with C.S. Lewis that life, natural life, has no better gift to give, and who could have deserved it? Amen.